Okay. So sorry for those online. I was introducing our guest from Nova University, Lisbon, and the book that we are going to present in a moment. I was mentioning her research in early modern environmental history with a focus on the Atlantic, interactions between humans, non-humans, different cultures, different people. So she's a researcher at CHAM, you correct me if I'm wrong with the pronounce, Center for the Humanities, affiliated with the Trinity Center for Environmental Humanities in Dublin. She's part of the board of Oceans Past Initiative and a member of the UNESCO Chair on Oceans Cultural Heritage and International Panel for Ocean Sustainability. So you're also very welcome here in the name of UNESCO that brings us together. Yeah. So we are here also with a group of the UNESCO Chair on Water Heritage and Sustainable Development. So let's have water heritage, the Water Heritage of the Lagoon dialogue with the oceanic one. So you are also part of a synergy project called For Oceans, Human History of Marine Life, that is still running. So you'll maybe tell us something about the project later. And I have the privilege of saying a few words about this book, Humans and Aquatic Animals in Early Modern America and Africa. It's a very nice reading. I was telling Cristina that it's not usual, not at least to me, to read a book on early modern history of science and related fields with such pleasure. So it's an interesting book, but also a book that is a very nice reading. I hope you'll tell us later something about the style. It's nicely readable, but it also alternated with some more literary parts. There are some stories, something more poetic, so if you can tell us something later. But most of the book is a reconstruction of human-animal interactions in oceanic spaces. There is a protagonist. The protagonist you already see from the cover of the book. It's a manatee. I hope you can see it well from this image. Also called sea cow or lamantino in Italian. So it's an animal with multiple names, with multiple identities, if I can say so. It's something that emerges very clearly from the book. So the meaning of this animal, I say meaning, is more than just the individuals and the species. It's the mythologies that were constructed in the encounters with these animals and other animals. There are some specific individuals of the species that became not only protagonists of your book, but of many narrations, many stories that circulated, were transformed, were varied in early modern books till present day, if I understand it right. So this is the animal in a sort of standard image that we can find online. It's a large mammal living mostly in water on the shores, eating grass. That's why a sort of cow, huge animal, and a mammal, despite of the fact of being always in water. Therefore, as one reads in the book, this animal has been called the last of the beasts and the first of the fish. So this hybrid nature, this amphibious nature of an animal that is both in water and on the shores, and triggered many fantasies, triggered the imagination of ancient times and still today. So I mentioned the fact that there are stories to be told and reconstructed. Cristina makes a fantastic work on telling some stories. I chose a few of them. So you'll find a lot of episodes, many actors, the indigenous populations, the Portuguese, the Spaniards, the Europeans, the Africans, because there is also a part on Africa, and of course the animals. This is very original in this book. I think the fact that animals are reintroduced in historical reconstructions, which, as you write in the book, is something we are trained not to do. So we tend to encounter animals in our stories, but we bracket them out in the reconstruction. Here they are not just bracketed out, they are part they are partners of long histories, a history in which animals like the manatee, this animal, was used for multiple purposes. So there is an economic side. It was food, it was commerced, it was used by and eaten both by local populations and Europeans. When the Europeans came with a lot of consequences on the preservation of the species. So if the species is under threat today, it's due to a long story of exploitation without, not always with respect. And the issue of respecting animal life comes very early in the book with a story that can be well encapsulated by this image. So this is a sea cow. It looks a bit fantasized to us, if you compare it with photos, with pictures that are taken these days. Cristina reconstructs the mental world of those people, in which stories and images circulate and were transformed, interpreted, merging the mythological, the mythological of the local populations and the mythological of European origins. So sea monsters from classical literature enter the scientific books, but also the reports on travels, manuscripts, starting from real encounters. So this is one of the claims that are particularly interesting here. Mythologies or legend or stories have their veridicity, and this truth is partially, if I get it right, so you can tell me later, partially it is because stories emerge from real encounters based also on the perspective of those looking and interacting, but also because imagination forges our way of seeing. So we have categories, and these categories are mediated by cultural backgrounds. That's why Europeans were very ready to see mermaids, merfolks, and other creatures from the classical sources, as well as new animals interpreted as devilish, for instance, and much more. So in a sense, there is a continuum between the mythological and the scientific, based on these many trajectories of culture, of ideas, of visions, of perceptions, of ways of experiencing, in which the European and the African and the American get merged. So this one is Mato. That's the name of this probably female manatee that was domesticated by an Indian chief from its very young age, and it then became a tamed, huge animal, as the one, not exactly as the one you see, but a big animal that was preserved in an enclosure, and within this enclosure, it lived. It was domesticated, familiar with the chief of the local population. It is in Hispaniola, with the local population, and it came when she was called to be fed. She carried people on her back till the day in which something happened. So it really it's a story with a dramatic plot. You see the European with a harrow to the bottom right of the image, a young European that throws that hits with a weapon the big animal. The big animal is not damaged because the skin is thick, but this scares the manatee to the point that animal would not re-emerge if any European was around. So would only come back in the presence of the indigenous people. You can immediately see that there is a story to be told. There is a case that is interesting, but it's also symbolically so interesting. It's symbolically because it's symbolical also of the complex interactions between the violence and the different attitude of the Europeans towards the environment. I hope I told the story in an adequate manner. So this is the first story I wanted to tell you. So you already enter in this space of legends, myths, and you reconstruct the paths of reception and reprinting of images. So what you see here is another story. It's the story of a monster in São Vicente, a locality. Is it? Yes. São Vicente, a locality in Brazil, right? Is it going by itself? It's moving on, the images. Anyway, so this is the interpretation by by Cristina. So it's a sea lion in the background of a story that was also transmitted and repeated many times. The story of an encounter with a monstrous creature coming from the sea, attacked and killed by a Spaniard, and reprinted and retold countless times in early modern sources. Third story, I'm going a bit faster. It has to do with human-animal interactions from a different viewpoint. It's a more utilitarian, maybe, not only, but more utilitarian. So this is a suckfish, a remora fish, that attacks other fish by stacking on them, including turtles, big fish. And populations from Jamaica, Cuba, Hispaniola used to domesticate those animals, let them grow, and use them for fishing, for hunting. So there is many reports, and the reports tell about indigenous people talking with this fish once it was big enough to be used for hunting, and then binding the tail with a rope in order to capture, with a very complicated technique, to capture turtles and other big animals. So you can read the details in the book, or maybe you can tell us more about this story. This is the story of animal-human interactions as resources in many ways, as also seen in a prism of different perspectives. There's the perspective of the local people talking with the animal. There's the perspective of the Europeans admiring this technique, but also mocking the superstitious attitude toward the animal in the moment of talking with it. And in these multiple perspectives, Cristina is very sensitive at proposing viewpoints that can help us seeing the various sides of multiple stories. It is not just a two-side story. It's not only Europeans and indigenous. It's European, indigenous, and animals. European, indigenous, and animals looking at these animals as tools, as resources, as food, as personalities, as symbols for their interpretation of the world surrounding them. The last chapter of the book, so you will find many of these stories in the book, many of these considerations. The last one is particularly interesting to me because that's the chapter in which some general considerations can be found, connecting those worlds with modern science. Not that science is not present in the other chapters, but this is the one in which Cristina reflects about the scientific codification and how mythologies are still part of those codifications. So the Sirenids, the fact that Linnaeus still calls the manatee as an animal belonging to the family of the Sirens, of the mermaids, is an echo of these earlier accounts, these earlier perceptions of sea monsters. So the difference and the margins that separate monsters mythologies from something that is observed, something that is described, and then comes in scientific books it's not so clear. And so it's important to see how science draws from those sources and back reinterprets them. This is also a chapter in which the larger societal frameworks become more explicit. The role of commerce, of hunting in the name of early capitalism, the imperial settings are thematized as the background of the story. So that's something I also like to listen more about. So the relation between mythological experiences of people and nature and the political settings in the background. Plus, this is the part in which Cristina discusses nature cultures, so the Anthropocene problem of the connection between nature and culture. Nature cultures are the spaces within which humans and animals interact as historical partners, literally as historical partners, not only in the stories, in the ways of interacting, but also from the larger viewpoint of the construction of empires. Whales, for instance, were a very important commodity. So the whole bureaucracy and arrangement of whaling in Brazil becomes a case in which one sees the transforming relation between humans and the animals in changing political and economic settings in the background. So it's quite interesting to reintroduce this element. There is a sentence that I'd like to quote from the book, saying in this spirit that the Atlantic world was constructed on the backs of whales, sea turtles, and manatees, as much as it was from sugar and cotton plantations. So we, of course, know the sugar and cotton plantation topic as part of the socioeconomic history of Atlantic transactions. It's interesting to see this other dimension, the maritime, the water dimension that has often escaped the analysis. Cristina does that in the name of Blue Anthropocene, or the study of nature culture. So something that I'd like to hear more about, the Blue Anthropocene. I think you invented this term, the Extocene. Is it from you? Yeah. So one more scene, the Extocene, as a catchword to think of the many extractivist approaches to, or elements of the story, connecting exploration, extractions, extirpations, extinctions, extensions, exhaustions. So it's a play of word, but it gives the sense of the specific angle that you want to communicate to the reader. So I think I spoke longer than I should have, but let me repeat, it's really a nice book to read. Even the individual chapters have the quality of standing alone. So if you just want to focus or deepen certain topics, I think you can do that easily. The chapters are self-contained, autonomous, but interrelated. There are some heroes, some protagonists like the manatee, but you'll find many more animals that I didn't even mention, from alligators to sharks to unicorns, etc. So moving from European printed books to American encounters and reports. There is a topic also that you address that triggered my curiosity. It's while you reconstruct the circulation of stories, of information, of images from the Americas and Africa to Europe and vice versa, you also pointed to a certain marginality in the reception, in the European reception of Portuguese and Spanish works on natural history. If you can tell us also something about what it means to write a history of global phenomena that are relevant for the Anthropocene from the viewpoint of different cultures than those that are more hegemonic in the main narrative, and maybe were more hegemonic in the construction of the scientific discourse. So thank you for being here. I leave the floor to you. I know that you also have some images to share. So yeah, please.
Okay, thank you so much. Hello everyone, and thank you for being here. It is my pleasure to be in Venice, not the first time, but it's always a pleasure to be in this beautiful city and in this brilliant, beautiful room that we are. So thank you so much for having me. And it's really a pleasure to talk about this book. I do have a PowerPoint, but I can just say a few words. Prior to that, I started writing the book a couple of years ago, and it does show, it reflects a little bit of my own trajectory. I have been working as an historian for 20 years now, but my background, my bachelor in fact, is in marine biology, and I did conducted research on marine mammals, whales, and dolphins, mostly in the wild. This gave me kind of the expertise to, when I was facing for the first time historical sources, written sources that are familiar for everyone doing early modern history, either for Europe or other parts of the world where Europeans were at the time. It just catch my attention that the fact that species, animals, their behaviors, their habitats were being described in a way that I could interpret them from an ecological point of view. So this is where it all started, and then I started to move from biology and ecology and behavior into history. I'm mostly a modernist, I would say, but rather fluid on my chronological boundaries. But I do work mostly on European, Portuguese, and Spanish sources for the period. But we try, myself and the team that I work with, and the book is also the result of the fact that I have a large, well, a certain number of people working with me. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But the book came from the fact that I did encounter this Mato story. And Mato was described by, so it was published, it was printed as an account, an event, kind of a natural anecdote for the colonial world, so the Americas, the New World, being known, explored, appropriated by Europeans, in this case Spaniards and Portuguese. I'm talking about Central America, South America, the Atlantic mostly. And Mato was described as, it was, I think, firstly described by Oviedo, so trying to encompass the natural history and the marvels, the wonders, and the wealth of the New World. But Mato specifically was considered as kind of an invention of the author. And even though people were retelling the story and republishing and doing some drawings and republishing the printings and engravings, most said it was kind of a myth, because the animals could not be enclosured, as he was mentioning, because animals didn't interact with people, as it was mentioned. But in fact, these and other animals can have and can live, as we do know today, they can live in very closed habitats for many years. They can be kept in captivity and survive. So it is not ecological impossible that something like this happen. As it is not impossible that animals could engage in terms of their own behavior with humans in a certain way, with some individuals in a way, and with other people in a different way. So the story of the Spanish that hit a manatee, and the manatee then wouldn't come to people dressed in a certain way, but still would come to his family. So the fact that the Taino people, so this indigenous chief was from the Taino group in Hispaniola, so the Caribbeans. It was a very powerful people of the region at the time the Spaniards got there, and people that would be also in control of their own environment and nature and the ways that they used not just land resources, but also resources from the sea. So I'm not telling here the myth of the good Indian, but the fact that local people in any part of the world would engage and transform and impact their own environments. So the Taino would have manatees as a food item, as a medicinal resource, as also as a mythological, symbolic animal, as well as a pet. So this could have been, this individual, this Mato, could have been a pet as much as other manatees could have been a food resource for the same family. So this kind of fluidity in the way local people would eventually interact with the animals is something that Europeans, when getting to that part of the world would not appreciate in the full detail at that time. So that story really struck me as something of interest in a way that we could see these animals more, well, as a biological animal with an ecological reality, but also more than that. So an animal that encompasses kind of many ways of being in the world. So it's kind of an all-encompassing being that's more than its life itself, and that represents the way that different societies in different times and different contexts interacted with animals, in this case, sea animals. And we could try to understand how different peoples would relate to, understand, and deal with nature. So nature from the Americas, including sea animals, was to be taken by Europeans. So it was as much as the land and the territory and the cultures and the people, so it was something to be taken, and it was. Most of what happened included transformation and disruption of local ways, indigenous ways of dealing with these animals, kind of an intensification that took place in the early modern period, and that's something that the research that we are doing shows very well. I think I'll just skip to the slides so I can...
Yes, you can use this one.
Yes? Okay, so I'll just skip a couple of slides, but yeah, thank you. Yeah, no, perfect. So just to give you a sense, so in Lisbon at the CHAM, the Center for the Humanities, we are a group of historians, environmental historians, archaeologists, but also literature scholars, some people from philosophy. We try to address these questions in a very kind of global and multidisciplinary and encompassing way. And as I was telling you, I'm coming from these 2 decades now of interacting with people globally that deal with the past of the oceans in many different ways, which led us to the project, let me just skip this, the project that we are still working on today, up to 2027. The 4 Oceans, or the Human History of Marine Life, is a ERC Synergy grant. We are 4 PIs from 3 different universities in Europe, and this is a very ambitious project aiming to address globally the extractions from the sea in the 2 millennia prior to industrialization. I know it's a lot. So the world, along a chronological framework through 10 taxonomic groups. So the focus is as well, so human history, but focusing on the animals and what it meant to people to use them and extract them, and what was the impact for the oceans. This is what we are doing, and these are our questions. Let me just skip to what I am doing today. Let me just show you. We deal with written sources, iconography, visual sources, but also material evidence, artifacts, remains of animals, and in the project we cross that also with genetic analysis and so on. But my focus as a marine environmental historian is mostly also a bit of material evidence, because we do like a lot of objects and artifacts, but I'm focusing on printed or manuscript sources for the period that I study. So words, what different people kind of fixed on books or printed words, and the images that go with it. And the humanities, again, show us, because we do have information from after the European contact, both in West Africa and the Americas, we have information that can be used to understand local uses. So we have the many different names, as it was just mentioned very correctly, are also in different languages that are not European, such as the Guaraguá for the Tupi in Brazil, meaning the sea pig or the sea cow. And we can have an idea of how these animals were also relevant to local societies. And I'll just move. Let me just go to my sources, sorry. I can come back to this a little bit later if we have the time. There you go. And we have, besides having the Guaragua in Tupi, we have the Ngulu Amaza in Kikongo for West Africa and the African languages. The same animal, so so the manatees or the Sirenians, the manatees and the dugongs in the Indian Ocean can, I believe, can help us to track a story that can be global, kind of a global history or a kind of environmental and cultural history of the animals based on case studies. These animals alongside those others, well, sharks and the remoras and the sea turtles that are kind of sister species of these ones, can help us tell a story that might be of convergence in the way humans see these animals and use them. Because they are, besides being kind of an all-encompassing entity, they are kind of hybrids in many ways. They were possibly the sources of many legends of sirens, mermaids, tritons, and other merfolk. What you have here is a representation of Mamiwata, the water spirit, that is part of one of many African religions, known at least for Europeans since the early modern period. And the symbolic, the religious, and the ritual meaning of these entities goes side by side with the animal itself. So the biological entity and the cultural entity are included in this animal, and this can be a story to be told. Part of it is in the book, and part of it is not, so this is kind of an ongoing work. There's a lot, well, I do like sources, so the book is full of kind of case studies and narratives and evidence of images and sources that we can use. And so I keep on digging more information, and one of the things that I'm interested in doing, and I've done that in the book, but I'm still doing, is trying to see how different authors for this time connected to one another, and how was European mainstream knowledge produced based on exotic knowledge, meaning by exotic, tropical or subtropical, so exotic in the sense decentered from Europe, but at the same time trying to see, well, that's the thing, if Europeans have been colonizing the world, but in some senses the natural and other works, but the natural history works that include information from tropical areas are in a sense colonized by this local and indigenous and traditional knowledge, information, and the animals themselves. So this idea, that's not on the book, in fact, so that's something that I'm working on, so I would love to hear your comments and questions on it. Can these animals that are not European have been colonizing the science or the natural history since the early modern period? So I'm trying to track where the authors are coming from, and, well, the sources, they are magnificent, and we can see how the information is being produced. So we have here the, can you say it in Italian, the pesce donna di...
The pesce donna è storica descrizione dei tre regni, Congo, Matamba,
okay,
e Angola.
So this, the Cavazzi and Sorrento, they are missionaries, Italian missionaries in West Africa, and coming back to Italy, published their work. And they had, at least Cavazzi, he tells us that he did not, so he describes the animal very accurately, so we see it's an animal, so there's no confusion there, but then that's the drawing of, it kind of looks like a mermaidish something, and he is, in the caption, he's saying that he had it drawn back when he was back in Italy by someone that could not fully understand what he was saying. So the idea, it was not drawn on place. He did saw the animal, but the drawing was made afterwards. And it was published and republished, or the engraving was reprinted, and it can be tracked down at least to these, the Parma watercolors that are sometime in the 17th century, that might have been the first, maybe in a painting atelier workshop where he had them painting. This might be the watercolors, the drawings that then ended up being the engravings that are published. So trying to track down the information is something that I'm really keen on doing it. and the fact that this also relates to, even today, different perceptions and ways that people deal with the animal, and how the biological animal is transformed in a cultural entity. And what you have here, even for today, possibly based on the manatee, but many other water animals, we have in the traditions of Guinea-Bissau, the peixe-mama, or in Cape Verde, Nhatia peixe-cavalo, and for São Tomé and Príncipe, Santo d'Água or Ocosso, and for Brazil we have Mãe d'Água, the water mother, or Yara or Iemanjá, that are kind of the result of syncretic or fusions between African ways of cosmogonies, African cosmogonies, indigenous and Europeans mixed all together. Yeah, so this is a little bit more of the accounts, and I was saying the work is ongoing because we are trying to do the same for the Indian Ocean and the dugong, where of course the cultural contexts are quite different. Well, the Indian Ocean is many worlds in one world, so it's a bit different from the Atlantic, but we can, as a practice, as an exercise, we can try to do the same thing with the dugongs and the mermaids. They are always connected. And I'm trying to, and coming to that point that was mentioned in the book, I'm not a literature scholar, but I read a lot, and I like literature, so I do not know methodological how to engage with it, but I'm trying to start to address works that somehow, so literature, current literature, but that somehow reflect historical information. And this is one step forward, right, that I'm working on, but that I started to do in this book that we are discussing today. So the book has different chapters. They are of empirical research in nature, most of it, and then they are trying to connect the different, some of the chapters. I have these free written essays or short stories or fictional and a poem, so it's a fictional way of writing, a different way of writing from more academic one, but that I feel that can help us deal with, moving from marine environmental history more into the blue humanities and to a more open way of engaging with the sources, the material, and other ways of cultural productions of our days. And this particular book, The Mermaid of Black Conch, it takes place in the Caribbean, sometimes in the late 20th century, so it's not dated, but we can kind of, it deals with white American fishermen coming from the United States to this part of the Caribbean to fish and extract a mermaid, and then the story of the mermaid being rescued by a local fisherman, and so on, so on. We are kind of familiar with this story. The very curious fact is that the mermaid is described as being dark-skinned and tattooed in the way that the Taínos were. So the mermaid is a reinterpretation of the symbolic power of the Taíno woman, and then she's saved by a local fisherman, a dark local man, and then she's back to the sea and so on. And that also resembled me a little bit of what I knew from that part of the world, but she is described as being, and then she transforms from mermaid into woman, and in the process she stays in a tub full of water. And that description in particular is very similar, well, it's not the same, but it's very similar to this mermaid that was found in the Amboyne Islands and described in the 18th century, and that it was kept in a tub of water for several days, most possibly, and died. Most possibly a dugong or any other animal that someone took from the sea, and that inspired both the depiction, the watercolor, and the description of a mermaid. And then this is taken again by Renard, and he places the mermaid and the dugong side by side, as most European naturalists did for the Renaissance and the early modern period. So beasts of the sea monsters, taken as real, side by side with real animals. Yeah, so this is a bit of what I'm doing. It comes from, let me just, sorry. This is the structure of the book. Yeah. I think I'll leave it here, so this is a passage of the book. So this is where I came from when dealing with this historical information, data, empirical research that we are conducting, and trying now to move more into also a more fluid way of producing science or narratives for the past that decenter from humans into animals, but also decenter a little bit from the global north to the global south, and decenter from land to the ocean. So all these kind of baby steps that we need to take to make the world more encompassing to us all. So I think I'll stay here, and I'm open to questions or to talk a little bit more, as you will.
Yes, no, thank you so much. Let me first thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So maybe before we open to the larger public, would like to stress something. So in the book that I read, you mentioned these dialectics. I think you call it dialectics between mythology and experience, which I think it's still informing your work right now. So there is a natural world, but the natural world is also very much the perception of the natural world. So there is this continuum between interpretations and the transforming relations in which the mythological is part of it. And as it seems to me, also the scientific is part of this interaction between experience and the word. This is one first consideration that I wanted to add. That reminds me of some conversations we had here. We had a conversation on early modern Greenland and narwhals. So the unicorn story and the relation with specific sea species and the way they were met, reinterpreted, circulated or not circulated, also based on continuous or discontinuous relations with Greenland in this case. And another case that comes to my mind is, and is very present in your book, are forms of attempts of rationalizing the experience that we see in some works. Like there is this scientific codification and an attempt to reinterpret certain stories on the basis on evolving scientific parameters and categories. That reminded me of Marco Polo's travels to the East, which sometimes he takes mythologies or myths or mythological animals and says, I saw it, but it's different than in the books. So for instance, the unicorn, back to the unicorn. So he says, I saw a unicorn, I think in Borneo or somewhere, and it's probably a rhinoceros or an animal that is not really at the height of the expectations of a lot of narrations circulating in Europe. So I think this interaction between experience and codifications, be them in both as literary mythological forms of codification or scientific codifications, is a very interesting acquisition in which the world is movable as much as the representations of it are.
Yeah, I can just comment because the legends of the unicorns are a very nice example, because my thinking when coming to this many years ago was that because I was dealing with mermaids, and of course my rational thinking as a scientist first of all, and that's also a process that we need to, being trained as a biologist and having to have categories for everything, I had to kind of deconstruct my own way of thinking and seeing and looking at the information. But I was assuming that once people were familiar with dugongs and manatees and other animals that were not present in Europe, most of the myths would disappear, as the unicorns did. So the idea that once we Europeans knew when what rhinoceros were or other animals, then kind of that horse-looking animal with the narwhal teeth kind of vanished. And so I was assuming that mermaids would too, but they don't. And that's really for me, a very interesting and curious characteristic of the human mind, because mermaids as we see them in Europe, but in many other formats and ways, are present in almost all cultures and societies where humans dealt with water places, not just the ocean, but springs and rivers and estuaries and many other, and large rivers, so kind of snake-like figures, not just the mermaid with the fish tail, and I'm not going back into neither classic or antiquity, but so science is science as we know it today, is being developed and constructed based on accumulation of knowledge, information, transformation, so the basic way of building nature through trial and error, even when looking to animals. And at the same time, mermaids and people, most of the people writing about them knew they were not real. They are there. And they are there in many cases because people wanted to sell books. So the audiences, so Aldrovandi and many others, they knew they were putting on fake specimens or fake nature, but there was a motivation to do it. But then it also connects to people in different ways because most of these people, wherever they are, they have this sense of belonging or needing an explanation that goes beyond the rationality of nature. So science is being built and is evolving, and at the same time legends, these legends in particular, and these myths are part also of the scientific world, not just the people's daily lives.
Cristina, one more thing. Can you tell us something more about the blue Anthropocene and the surrounding concepts?
So as I mentioned, being kind of early modern scholar and dealing with not just the ocean, but environment as a whole and exploitation of nature and extractions and disruptions, mostly by European in non-European parts of the world, I think it's really hard not to consider that there's an Anthropocene prior to the 20th century Anthropocene as we know it. And now we can discuss there's no Anthropocene right now, so no geological epoch, but there's this concept, the term, the word that we used that explains how humans have impacted, either geologically or not, have impacted the world that they live in, either locally or globally. And in fact, I'm not the one saying it. Many people have addressed it in many different ways. So we have Steve Mann's, I think the blue Anthropocene is his.
He also presented here.
Yeah, oh, he did, yes. He's a good friend. Or Annette Singh's detonators or disruptors, also for the early modern period. And I do feel that that's a moment, we like it or not, there's a moment that changed the world forever. So there's a moment prior to European expansion and colonization of the world, and there's the world after it. And the impact, and again, I'm not saying that local people, wherever we are talking about, or indigenous people, did not disrupt their own ecosystems. Of course, they did in many different ways. But the intensification that came with the European presence and the mercantilization, the commodification of the resources, and slowly turning into a capitalism of nature, changed dramatically ecosystems, species. It led some to extinction, it led others to extirpations. It changed the way the ecosystems were, and it changed the way locals dealt with their own environment, even though they were, of course, engaging and extracting and impacting. They started doing it in a very different way. And the symbolic meaning, so this motto in the lake could have been something that is still present in some indigenous societies, the fact that people use resources to live, to survive. Well, they use them, and at the same time they give something back. And they give something back by protecting a couple of animals of the same species that they are using. This is me just going above my head on this, but this could have been something like this. So we extract these animals, but at the same time we protect a couple. So it's not a taboo, but kind of a symbolism of balance that's embedded in some of these societies. But yeah, I think we have to deal with the blue Anthropocene way back. an Anthropocene that was built on the ocean, through the ocean, and by the resources of the ocean, or the waters, if we will.
So early modernity is a crucial moment in this.
Yeah, for me it is, yes.
So we have time for questions from the public. I don't know if we have a microphone for those who are...
We can just...
Thank you.
Okay.
So...
Yeah, I was interested in this fact that you were mentioning this biological entity was sort of transformed into a cultural entity, but I feel like currently the way how we speak about animals is extremely dominated by this biological, ecological language. And as you were just saying in your last point, that people crave something more, and that maybe, yeah, I don't know, this doesn't fulfill the feelings, or like that there is something missing in this very rational scientific language. Where would you see the future of how we speak about animals like the manatee, but also different animals? I mean, we can't go back to the mermaids probably, but maybe also this biological way is not the definite way how to convince people to protect them.
You mean today, right? Conservation and science today, yes. That's a very good question, because in fact, once more, we are talking about mainstream science and the way the global south, in this case Europe, that's where we are now today, kind of deals with the world and the problems of the world, including conservation and extinction and degradation of the environment. But when studying these animals, they are, of course, they are placed in regions that they are not European, with people today that most of them do not think as European do. So I think conservation today needs to take into consideration as well local realities and local cultural realities, because people think of animals today very differently from one another. So I can give you I think that's in the book, that's something that I opened the book with, because when coming from biology and conservation background, when I talk to people and I ask them about animals, I'm assuming that they are thinking as I am, which is, I want the animals to live, and the populations to thrive, and the environment to be as balanced as we can, well, living in a world where humans dominate, but still. And so I did have this very strange surprise many years ago when asking in São Tomé and Príncipe some fishermen about dolphins. So we were doing a questionnaire, and I asked something like, do you know dolphins? We're talking about certain species. Yes. Do you like dolphins? Yes. Do you eat dolphins? Yes. And I was kind of, what? How can you like dolphins and eat dolphins? And he was like, of course, I like them. I want them alive so I can kill them and eat them. Okay, the way people see animals today, the perception that people have about animals is very different from one another. And people dealing with manatees today in West Africa, where they are eaten, even though they are internationally protected. In the Amazon, where they are captured and eaten, even though they are protected. Or in the United States, where they are not eaten, but they are struck by boats, for instance. It tells us a lot of how people deal with the animals and what we as a whole need to deal with. And that is take into consideration local cultural variations in the way we deal with nature, we humans, I mean. And conservation efforts need to be kind of tailored to local and cultural realities. It might not be the case to just tell people stop killing these animals because we want them to be alive, but see what matters to people. And history helps, because the notion of historical narratives, how things have changed or not, how things have developed in a certain region, according to time context and regional context, might help to build a narrative or a framework for conservation today that can be effective. I think that's really important for animals that are in that are tropical, and in parts of the world that food is something that is really important to people, for instance.
Thank you for the intriguing presentation, and I was particularly interested in knowing more about, let's say, the epistemological part and the method of your research. I think that is very a post-colonial perspective, the one that you put in trying to use as a main character something that we could conceive as subaltern, right, or a voiceless character. But I'm also wondering about the ways in which the information about other populations, local population perception of those animals arrive to us, right? And through, imagine, sources coming from the Spanish or the Portuguese Empire. So I would like to know more, what was your critical approach to those sources?
Yeah, that's something that's really hard to do. So we are, the sources, they are Eurocentric. They were produced with a certain purpose, which is globally to feed the empire in many ways. And indigenous groups are as silenced as animals are. So it's really hard to do both at the same time. So we are reading the sources, we are comparing sources, and we are trying to, and we know that the information tells a little bit more about those that write them than the ones that are being told about. So it's really hard, but we are trying to compare different types of sources and see communalities. If there's information that seems plausible, and it's even not being anachronical, but that is comparable even today to what is happening in certain parts of the world, we are addressing it that way. So also being informed by ethnographic perspectives, a little bit of anthropological perspectives, and trying to fill in the voids of the sources. But it's not, yeah, we are perfectly aware that we are dealing with sources made by Europeans for Europeans. Eventually, and that's a path that we are trying to undertake as well in the project, and to do pre-contact, to have pre-contact information, or we have to rely on archaeologists and what that information might inform us. And for instance, information on, that's why we know that the Taino and other peoples used to eat manatees and sharks and whales and dolphins, because there are remains in shell middens. I'm not sure if that's the correct, or in shorelines, there are remains of bones that have evidence of being used as food items. They were burned, they were cut, yeah. So trying to not just compare different types of sources, but also use different disciplines that can help us track this story. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. It's all really interesting. Are you familiar with the work of Alexis Pauline Gumbs? She wrote Undrowned.
It's one of my favorite books at the moment.
Oh, great, great. A chapter of my thesis is totally inspired by her approach, so I was just really curious. I would love to hear you talk a little bit more about what you were talking about, colonies or colonizing in terms of other continents and indigenous people within those worlds. I don't know if I understood it at all, and you said it's some work that you're doing more recently. If there's anything you could talk about that, and it related to me. It made me think of Undrowned a lot when you mentioned it. So I was just curious.
She even mentioned she uses. Maybe you can tell a little bit more about her than I do. So I'm just reading her book. I don't know her as a scholar, but she does mention the fact that. Even the names of the sea mammals or sea animals were colonized, so they were transformed into Portuguese or Spanish or other language names. That's why I like to use the Guaragua, because it is the Tupi name, and she uses the Tupi word for the river dolphin Tucuxi, and she just mentioned, let's just keep saying her name. So she addresses the fact that everything is colonized, not just and that's a bit what I'm doing. So, of course, people colonized territory and created European counterparts in non-European areas. So the idea of colonization of nature, of domestication and commodification is not new, of course, but it's something that we want to address. And the fact that, and we know cultures, of course, and peoples were colonized, but the symbolism behind it or the words that people use to express it were also colonized. So that's my reasoning, and that's something that I'm trying to work. And as I said, it's a bit of path moving again. I did it from biology to history, and maybe now from history to I don't know what within the humanities. So using different approaches to also to have a more open way of understanding the past. So my focus is in understanding the past in the sense that, well, it's not just the past helping us to know the present and the future, we know that, but I'm keen in understanding how people adapt in different contexts. And history does help us to give a sense of time to that. And dealing with animals that are tropical, we are talking about colonization and the world after the European.
In the sort of shift that you went from being an ecologist and biologist to humanities type of approach, in history, you know, when we talk about social populations colonizing versus biology talks about colonies and colonizing too, but they come from a similar, obviously, kind of place, but I'm just curious.
Words have different meanings for different disciplines today, for different scientific disciplines. And for instance, when I was doing my PhD as an historian for the early modern period, I was told, because I came from this background on animal behavior, and I used the term population and even culture for animals. So I would write human population, and my supervisor told me, no, and so you're talking about the population. Of course it's human, just drop a human, and I did for my PhD, and now I'm coming back to it again, because in fact, there is different species, populations, and cultures, and ways of living, and colonizing, of course. So I'm again trying to use biological concepts, but more than that, the thing is, I think we need to make sure that humans are part of the ecologies and the trophic networks, and that other animals are part of the historical narratives. I think that's my point, in fact. Making sure that humans are also ecological beings in the way they, or were, and still are, in the way they are top predators and impact environments, but also other non-human animals being part of the histories that we write. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but it's
No. It was very helpful. No, thank you.
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. For me, it was very interesting because I am working a little in the Anthropocene also, but in the case of Mexico, also from early modernity. And I mean, it's quite interesting to see this from the oceans, no? And even from the animals, as as Alfred Crosby already mentioned, like they transform, no? But the land, no? So the oceans is usually more taken into account for navigation techniques, no, something like that. But from this perspective, it's quite interesting. I want to ask you about, today's problem, no, related with water, international waters, oceans, in this extractivist colonization approach, because I think it's also linked with this imaginary. Not only in the traditional communities. There is indigenous linguistic from Mexico, Yarnara Aguilar, that mentioned that, this critique, no, that science is objective and traditional cultures are more mythological. And she mentioned, like, for communities, this kind of laws that a paper sign represent is the more most magical issue for them. No, I mean, it's like, how do you can say that this is your land because you have a paper? It's like crazy, no? So I want to ask you about this. This kind of proposal to explore international waters, no, deep waters. Even, for example, changing the names in the case of the Gulf of Mexico, for example. No? So how these imaginaries are involved in these extractivist practices, and how can we deal with them?
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if I can reply to that, but I can try to think with you. As you know, for the early modern, the sea was, well, the open sea first was Portuguese, and then was Portuguese and Spanish, and was Spanish, and it belonged to European nations, but the high seas, in fact, kind of didn't belong to anyone. So it was empty spaces on maps, on histories, and again, the high seas started to be colonized by Europeans, and names were given, and so on. And the legal framework for that, it's a little bit late, on the 18th century, but the open sea and the open resources, I think it was always seen, and the animals from the seas, and the water columns, and the depths, and the open oceans, were always seen as unfathomable. They were infinite. They were always there, of course, for people to take them, but they would always be available. So this sense of infinitude of the ocean itself, I think it is what gave people the sense that sea resources were infinite, of course, and there was a lot of them. And it's not the same when you are talking about mammals of the sea, and we are talking about fish or invertebrates, of course, but the sense of this abundance of the oceans is transversal to European nations across the world. And then locally, I think it depends a little bit on the local context, but I think most people had this, and this is quite a broad generalization, but I think that most people had the sense that sea resources were there and were available to everyone to take. There was a lot of it. And I don't know locally, by the middle or late 18th century, it's the first kind, not conservationist, but the first idea of resources being overexploited started to be expressed. But in the very utilitarian sense. So again, we are exploiting too much, we should stop, or we should have some time of the year not to catch this and that, so we can have them in the following year. But I think that's what I can say about it.
So we have a question in the background.
Thank you for a wonderful paper. I'm really curious about your mermaid studies. It seems to me you're suggesting that from a subaltern perspective, there's a minority perspective in there about the mermaid disrupting many ways in which we historicize the past and the present, and potentially I'd just like to hear more, and I'm really curious because you're suggesting that creative methods and using an interdisciplinary approach that connects with literature and fictional accounts are an interesting source of data here for you to explore what seems to be a very troubling kind of, whether you call it an iconic figure, semiotic, however you want to articulate its presence, but you're saying something about how it's translated, and the traffic of that translation is one that you want to address and reclaim and rethink. And I think you're suggesting there's something really disruptive about doing mermaid studies. So those histories of colonization, decolonization, modernity, post-modernity, it sounds like there's something really important there.
Yeah. Not sure really how to call it, but I think it works very well as a metaphor for many different times and different places of the world. I think the hybridity of and the queerness of the mermaid itself over time and over cultures being addressed in it's not the same, but in a kind of similar way. The way that people use mermaids is a way to express everything that's out of the norms whenever we are talking about it or wherever. So the idea that people categorize and needs to classify and understand the world, and science is this itself, you know, moving from natural philosophy, natural history into botany, zoology, and so on. And then there's all these in-betweens or stuff, whatever it is, that doesn't fit what is the rule, and mermaids or hybrid beings, other mythological beings could work here. They are a metaphor for everything that's out of boundaries, and they express paradox and fluidity at the same time. And I think that must be engaging for people. That might work very well as a cultural way of explaining what is at a certain moment is not explainable eventually. And it does work very well. Well, even today in literature, in cultural, in pop art, in movies, there are a number of movies using the idea of mermaid as something that connects worlds or realities or states of mind, for instance. You know, trying to understand a world that's hard to understand. And I think that's the point that I want to explore. And I think it can be transversal and cross-chronological and kind of global. My attempt also to try to put together these global histories, and many cannot, but there are both the animal and the mermaid. I think that they can work well in a global framework for environmental and cultural history of the oceans. And that's my expectation for the times to come. Let's see.
So if I can add to that, there is a question online, but wanted to reflect a bit on the symbol of the mermaid, which seems to be also a symbol of the relation between knowledge and reality. So it's also a philosophical figuration of a problem that we call historical epistemological, in the sense that there is an attempt to find those structural invariants, if I can call them like that. So you point to ways of looking or animals that connect even continents that are not in connection before a certain time in history as a sort of objective ground of fluid constructions that can be narrative, historical, literary, mythological, and scientific. And the problem here is, so I would say the apparent paradox is that the access to reality is to our forms of knowledge is mediated by these hybrids, whether it's the mermaid or it's science as a more structured and categorical way of looking. The case that Omar was mentioning, that it has something magic still, and the magic is still this level of abstraction that mediates knowledge and the reality. And I'm mentioning the historical epistemological in the sense that we have to come to terms with the situation in which we are looking for the materiality in its objectivity, but the objectivity is always mediated by cultural forms,
Of course.
mythological or scientific.
Yeah.
And so we are in the making. So the process of the unfolding is where we stand, and we have to come to terms.
Yeah. We should, sometime soon. I don't know.
There's a question by, so maybe one of the last interventions here. And so Noemi, I'll read it, Noemi, okay? So I see them among those who are attending the meeting. So she asks, she would like to point to the problem of animals colonizing science that you mentioned, I think. And she says, I would like to learn more about it. So animals colonizing, this figuration. About it through some examples. Are you also thinking about the concept through the contemporary idea of invasive species? And she thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Noemi. Yes, that's also an idea that Annette Singh presented to her in her Feral Atlas. But the first idea of it was not mine. It was a colleague. I'm not sure if from Mexico, I'm not sure, but the idea, but it was an indigenous scholar, maybe from Brazil, I'm sorry, I can't recall right now, that gave me this, when I was presenting these tropical animals and the information that the books, the printed books from Renaissance and early modernity in Europe were showing. And he mentioned to me, you know, look at this. These are all tropical, exotic examples of nature. So it is, and he was like, we should look at it the other way around. When you, of course, Europeans are appropriating it, but when you appropriate it, you are being colonized by the tropical world. So it's a tropical world making its move into European books that up to a certain point were based mostly on European ecologies. So the tropical or the bioregions and the ecosystems and the animals themselves from other parts of the world making its way into European encyclopedias and framework of knowledge. So that's a concept that I'm just putting it out there for us to think and consider. But looking at many of these sources, they are full of evidence of the tropical world. Yeah, I think there is a comment. Yeah.
I was just thinking about the power dynamics and the word colonizing.
Okay.
And so, but I also see what you're saying about this, but maybe the word occupy
Okay.
is
I can consider it. Yes, of course. Yeah.
because I do see what you mean, how the fascination of the animal or the flower from these exotic places that were unusual then occupy the imaginations
Mm-hmm.
and became even an obsession.
Yeah.
And, you know, to some degree, you know, like, there is power in that flowers then being, like, not only orchids, you know, everywhere.
Yeah.
The way that these orchids are surviving, you know.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, perfect. I'll take that into consideration. Thanks a lot.
So I think you can join me thanking our guest today. Thank you so much for
Welcome. Thank you so much
for
for
your
having
book
me.
and for the long your long intervention here. Thank you so much.
Welcome.